Hello, and welcome to Kumi Now. Thank you for joining us for this latest online gathering as we talk about human rights around the world and in Israel and Palestine. We're glad that you're able to join us this week. My name's Mariana, and I want to acknowledge that I live on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples in Vancouver. Before we go further, I'd like to remind you that our webinar is being broadcast on Facebook and will be posted to YouTube. If you want to make sure your photo does not accidentally appear online, please turn off your camera. We would also greatly appreciate it if you could quickly share one of the links that are being put in the chat so that others may join. As usual, if you have an idea or a project you'd like to share for up to 5 minutes in a future meeting, please email us at kumi@kuminow.com. Now it's time for our weekly activism survey. We will now launch the poll. Please note that there are 3 questions, so scroll down for the third. How are we doing with the poll? Thank you to everyone who was able to take action this last week. And thank you to everyone in advance for the action you're going to take this coming week. The answer to question number 2 is A, 1948. And the answer to question 3 is D, 30. I see you got them. Great. We hope that you will find this session interesting and informative. I'd like to start by having you meet our speakers for today. Omar, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, friends, my name is Omar Harami, and I will be sharing a very brief update on the ground. I'm from Sabil, Jerusalem.
And if you've been paying attention to things, you'll see that we have a new speaker today instead of who we advertised, and that's Hamdi Shaqqura. Would you introduce yourself, please, Hamdi?
Well, I'm Hamdi Shaqqura. I am Deputy Director for the Palestinian Center for Human Rights. We are based in Gaza, working on human rights protection and advocacy. We are working on human rights violations carried out by Israeli occupation forces and by Palestinian authorities. As you know, Gaza is a tiny strip in the area, very much densely populated, with the huge focus because of its it's been part of the Palestinian Authority, but since 2007, Hamas took over. So we are struggling against 3 duty bearers: Israel as an occupation force, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas de facto authority in Gaza. Thank you.
Thank you. Omar will now give us an update on what's happening in Palestine.
Thank you very much. Interestingly, for the first time since a long time, the US administration has succeeded to convince Israel to stop the building of a new settlement at Kalandia Airport or Jerusalem Airport before the occupation of 1967. Israel was planning to build a settlement with over 9,000 homes that would be made for Jewish settlers. However, the US government has exerted a number of lots of pressure on the Israeli government, and Israel has said today, just a few hours earlier, that they plan to stop the building, but due to doing an environmental study to explore the impacts of the settlement on the environment. So things are changing, at least from the Trump era. In the Jordan Valley, the West Bank, 88% of the West Bank remains under the Israeli, under the control of the Israeli military. Out of the 88%, 20% are dedicated as a military zone. So Israel has or reserves the right to use 20% of the occupied West Bank for military exercises. However, they only use 20% of the West Bank traditionally, usually for military exercises. In a village close to Tubas, Israel has the Israeli army has distributed 2 days ago a military order asking the people who are living there in these villages and towns to leave them, as they will be conducting a 10-day military exercise. It doesn't happen often, but when it happens, especially at any time of the year, but especially during winter, when it is cold, they leave hundreds of families displaced and without a shelter. So please hold the people in the Jordan Valley in your prayers. Israeli settlers continue their attacks on Palestinian villagers. Recently, they started to use new tactics. So many of these settlements have hundreds or thousands of sheep. They raise also cattle. They started to release their herds on Palestinian farmers who have just finished the olive picking season. They have started it started the planting season for Palestinian farmers. And when they release hundreds and hundreds of sheep in their small villages, the sheep destroy the potential crops. When the villagers went out in Masafir Yatta to try to change the direction of the sheep, the settlers used weapons and attacked the Palestinian farmers. So please, many of you are aware of Masafir Yatta and have served there or visited there as volunteers. Please do remember them also in your thoughts and your prayers. An interesting action took earlier this week in Argentina. In Buenos Aires, hundreds of human rights organizations, civil society members, activists, many within and many community leaders, even members of parliament, had a huge demonstration in Buenos Aires to show solidarity with the Palestinian people. And in a symbolic action, they all went to the Palestinian embassy and applied for citizenship. It has been really a very inspiring action, and many cities now are copying this in Latin America and Central America. So commitment continues and action continues to happen around Palestine for all of the people who cherish justice and value human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. And it's good this time that we have some good news to balance with the sad news that we're hearing these days. We now turn to our main issue of the week, human rights, and our special guest, Hamdi Shaqqura. As he speaks, if you think of a question, please type it in the chat, and I'll try to ask as many of them as possible when we get to the Q&A. So please go ahead with your presentation, Hamdi. You have to unmute yourself, or Ryan does.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mariana, and thank you, Omar and Sabil. This is my second time I participate in Kumi Now events. This is very impressive events, and I'm very glad to see so many people, so many audience, so many solidarity people around Palestine, around justice in Palestine. The slogan that I've seen on the screen, Together for Justice, really expresses a need here in Palestine. We demand nothing more or less than justice, because I firmly believe that a stable, sustained, strategic peace can never be achieved unless it is firmly built on strong pillars of justice and respect for human rights. That's why, as a human rights defender, I call human rights defenders and human rights organizations as agents for peace, because this is the real peace we are all looking for or aspire to. We demand nothing more than implementing justice, than implementing international law and human rights law in particular. Something that we all miss here. And as I said before, I'm based in Gaza. Gaza is a unique place for so many grave breaches against civilians. The people of Gaza look for justice. And again, it may appear to some, especially for politicians, that justice contradicts with peace. But we believe in the opposite. And we believe that as long as human rights violations, abuses go unpunished, unless as long as victims of human rights violations continue to be deprived from the right to justice, we are going for more and more violence, for more and more instability in this region. So let's all pray for justice. Let's all be committed to achieving justice. In Gaza, the situation is really dark, and this year has been unprecedented for many years. Sometimes it's really difficult for me where to start from, to give in a brief presentation a portrait of the human rights situation. But to start with the most and the severest account this year has been the war on Gaza that lasted for 11 days last May. I witnessed 4 wars during, the last 15 years or so, or less than 15 years. 4 brutal wars against Gaza: 2008, 12, 14, and yet I do not think this was the last one, the 2021. Who, as we monitor the whole situation and document all wars, all the impact on civilians, I can fairly say that who paid the heaviest price out of these wars have been the innocent civilian population, those whom we are committed to advocate for and do whatever possible in order to ensure their protection. For the last war, and we have just concluded our joint data as human rights organizations. 240 people were killed. Out of this total number, 151 civilians. 60% of the total death toll were civilian, including children and women. 59 children and 38 women. The number of casualties out of this war, we are talking about almost more than 1900s, sorry, 1,972 wounded persons, including 632 children, 399 women. The impact of the war on the level of the housing, attacks on the property. We are talking about almost 8,000, around 8,000 housing units been damaged. Out of them, more than 1,300 completely destroyed. You cannot imagine how right now I'm at home, but you cannot imagine how the whole earth, the whole ground was shaking during the attacks. In other areas, thousands of people were displaced. They escaped the war with nowhere, no safe haven whatsoever. And yet the Israeli occupation claimed to have the attack against targeted Hamas. I mean, this is completely untrue because we have figures, we have the numbers of who paid the price. As always, as in previous wars, the overwhelming majority of those who were killed or injured in the war were innocent civilians and children, including children and women. Until now, I have or cannot understand how complete tower blocks been smashed to earth by airstrikes for no reasons. One of the building was a host of international organizations, very well known in Gaza, to be a civilian area. We investigated most of these cases, and this very clear example. We investigated this tower building. Until now, we found no reason, no justification how it was attacked and why. It hosted some international media outlets, including Associated Press, including Al Jazeera English, and many other local media outlets. They were given like 5 minutes to flee. So people just rushed to the streets, leaving their homes, leaving their, if we are talking about media offices, leaving their equipments, unable to carry a single document even, just rushed out of this building. And in a few minutes, it was attacked and smashed to earth. This applies to dozens of other examples. I was reviewing just yesterday a report and the conclusion of our investigation on a similar attack on the northern area in Gaza. The people were given, let's say they were warned, they were given 1 minute to leave. The person who was phone called by the Israeli security managed in 1 minute just to flee his apartment, but was unable to reach his neighbors. You cannot imagine under this situation how he would manage if he was given just, you have 1 minute, you should leave your house immediately and inform your neighbors. So he left. All of his neighbors were killed, smashed under the rubble of their buildings. Many buildings, including children, including women. Yet Israel claimed to say when they attack a property, they warn the residents. So this is an example of how they warn the residents. Sometimes the warning take another method. It's not by phone call from a security agent. Sometimes there is a strike or a missile called knock the roof. So prior to the devastating attack, they would attack with a small missile to knock the roof, so people would understand that the building must be evacuated and another attack will be carried very soon. The knock the roof missile itself is a deadly weapon. Sometimes people are killed because of the warning. So they warn, you cannot imagine, this is a warning. They warn with a weapon, with a missile. So we warn you, we sent a warning prior to that. In other cases, and we have in Gaza, many neighborhoods been smashed to earth without warning. The Israeli side or the Israeli army claim to have attacked tunnels underneath these buildings. So, but who paid the price? The civilian population, not Hamas militants who are underneath the, if the claim was correct. Hamas, Israel says they attacked the tunnels. From their side, Hamas says that Israel only destroyed 5% of the tunnel networks in Gaza. So to complete the destruction of all tunnels in Gaza, Israel needs to destroy the entire Gaza Strip, and they will not reach the tunnels if this is the rationale. They need to kill the entire civilian population in order to that we say always war is not a solution. War is not the answer for the situation here, but rather the answer is to address the root cause of the deterioration of human rights, the deterioration of the situation in Gaza, which is occupation. Occupation remains the only concern for us. Since 2005, Israel claimed to have withdrawn from Gaza. This is a lie. This is a myth. Israel never lifted its upper hand from Gaza. Yes, they redeployed their forces, dismantled the settlements in Gaza, the Israeli settlements in Gaza, but still they control every single aspect of our life in the Gaza Strip. One, the borders, all of the borders, Gaza is enclaved by Israel, encircled by Israel, except for one outlet through Egypt. So our restriction is controlled by Israel. The air is controlled by Israel. No airport in Gaza, the only airport was destroyed even prior to Hamas. It was destroyed almost 20 years ago. So we have no outlet to leave. A port, we have no port. We are not allowed to have our seaport. Even the sea is completely controlled by Israel. Even the fishermen, Palestinian fishermen in Gaza, according to, and I hate to quote the Oslo Accords, because it was never been a recipe for peace, but rather for a conflict and for a coming war every time. But according to Oslo, we are entitled to almost 20 nautical miles for Palestinian fishermen. Until now, that goes back to 1993. But until now, people are not allowed to fish in an area that may exceed, as of now, 6 to 9 nautical miles. And fishermen are always attacked in the sea, confiscation of equipment, shooting, many people are injured, arrested, from the poorest of the poor. The fishermen in Gaza are considered vulnerable population. They are among the poorest of the poor in Gaza. So Israel continue to control every aspects of our life, even civil registration. Now it appears to have a de facto government which is controlled by Hamas, an enemy to Israel. But you cannot imagine a person who is born in Gaza can never have a national number without the approval of Israel. So our civil registration is controlled by Israel, and they can decide who is a Gazan, who is a Palestinian in Gaza, and who is not. Until now, it's Israel who decide about that. And every birth, newborn must be reported to Israel, so that they include the newborn and they exclude any dead people. So they control that. And for the last 15 years, Israel has been imposing a very strict and severe restrictions, blockade on Gaza. So they control economic transactions and the movement of people. As of now, let's say, as a human rights defender, I am not allowed to travel to Jerusalem. I'm not allowed to travel to the rest of the West Bank or to Israel. I am not allowed to travel outside the country through Israeli territory. And this applies to millions of people. Until now, only some categories of population are allowed in a very bureaucratic process and security procedure. Patients who need medical transfers, though some of them and many of them are denied, though they on a humanitarian basis, they must receive medical treatment that is not available in Gaza. Some surgeries in Jerusalem, the rest of the West Bank, or even in Israel or abroad. Some merchants are allowed, and you cannot give any recipe who is allowed and who is not allowed. Sometimes for no understanding, you cannot understand. This person would be allowed, and the other would not. But it's about a quota, just a few hundreds of people are allowed to leave. And this applies to who can come to Gaza. For you are from different countries. You cannot come to Gaza. Even diplomats who have representation of their countries in Jerusalem or in Ramallah, they cannot come without a permit, an Israeli permit. For international, let's say international, you cannot just, you wish to come to see things, to visit, to support, you are not allowed. All these special categories of people who can come. One, UN staff and diplomats, of course, with permits, everybody with permits. Second, international humanitarian organizations who have registration in Jerusalem. So if an international, let's say an Australian organization without having an office, a branch office in Jerusalem registered with the Ministry of Interior, they cannot come, even their delegates cannot come to Gaza, plus the media. So those who are allowed to come to Gaza, and not any media, they have especially criteria for the media, international media, who can come and who cannot come, the size of the media outlet, the publication, whatever. So restriction of movement is a major issue for Gazans, and it's a daily proof that the occupation is here. I cannot move, I cannot travel. Freedom of movement is a basic human right, but we are deprived of this right. Family unification is a dilemma here. It's not allowed. If I want to visit a relative in Ramallah or in Jerusalem, I am not allowed. In exceptional cases, for this specific humanitarian issue, let's say if I have a brother in the West Bank, not until he dies that I can travel. If I am security, from a security point of view, cleared, so I can travel, I need to bring the documents that I have a brother in Ramallah and he died with a certificate, so I can travel for a few days for that. So this is the case in Gaza. To us, accountability is a major issue. As a human rights organization, it's one of the top priorities, strategic priorities for my organization. We work a lot with the International Criminal Court. Jointly with other organizations, we have been doing wonderful work, impressive, I think. Most recently, the prosecutor of the ICC opened an investigation in the case of Palestine. We availed all information through communications, legal submissions, meetings to the court. We hope that the court will go ahead. Already they have established the investigation team, and already it's under work. Now they are working. This year it's been extremely important in this in the development of the work before the ICC. I believe that as long as human rights and international law violations go unpunished, the situation will deter more and more. That's why I appeal to all of you to support the ICC, the International Criminal Court. It is our legal window of opportunity. It is, of course, boycotted by Israel. The United States already sanctioned the court during the Trump administration, sanctioned the court, the staff, including the prosecutor, the general prosecutor. Still, the Biden administration left the sanctions, but do not cooperate. They accept the ICC, but not against Israelis or Americans. I understand International Criminal Court as a window of opportunity for the entire world, for millions of victims around the world. It's not designed for Palestinians or for Israelis. It needs all of our support. Our conclusions about the ICC, and most recently we have met them in Den Haag, PCHR together with other organizations, and we've seen how serious they are, committed. Of course, they have been subjected to severe political pressure from some government, from Israel and the United States mainly, but I trust those people are in the right track. They need our support. I will stop at this point. The agenda, the human rights agenda in Palestine and Gaza is very heavy. So I prefer, if you have any questions, any issues that you need me to elaborate or shed light on. It's my pleasure. Thank you for your time, for listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamdi. That was very informative. Now we want to introduce our action for the day and give everyone a few minutes to get started on it before we do the questions and answers. This time also allows our guests to have a short break and get a drink. There we go. He must have known my script before answering your questions, and allows you to take a break as well. As you can see on the slide, we'd like to dedicate a song to Palestinians, either on a local radio station or by sharing a link to a Palestinian song on social media or sharing Palestinian music in some other way. Hamdi, do you have any thoughts on our Kumi action for this week or other ways that our viewers can promote human rights around the world and in Palestine?
You mean any specific action?
Yes. Is there any specific action that you would recommend to us to take to promote human rights for Palestine?
So many actions can be can be letters to your governments in support of the ICC. Sabil may help. We can, as PCHR, may also support if you need to help in drafting the letter or the ideas. But I think a letter to the government to support the ICC of Palestine is extremely needed. Great.
And some of us in Canada know that our government isn't willing to support the ICC, so we have a job to do there. Okay, now we'll get to work, and Ryan's putting instructions up on the screen. Please note that Zoom does not allow on-screen links. Everything you need to know is being shared in chat. We'll give you about 5 minutes to get started, and then we'll come back to do the Q&A. Okay, we can move on to our questions and answers now. Hamdi, people are concerned about the people that became homeless after the bombing. And I think you said 8,000 housing units were damaged and 1,300 were completely destroyed. So someone who was asking how many people have been displaced by this. And then two people were asking about what's happened to these people who lost their homes, or what kind of shelter do they have now? How is that working out for them?
Well, thank you. According to the humanitarian, OCHA, which is the Humanitarian Coordination Office of the United Nations, almost 113,000 fled their homes during the fighting, mostly in the northern area and the eastern parts in the Gaza Strip. They fled mostly at night. They just escaped the attacks on foot. They were to walk with their children, women, children, and men as well, several kilometers just to reach any shelter. They rushed most of them to some schools administered by UNRWA. UNRWA is the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. So the overwhelming majority found refuge in these areas, though we have been in discussion with UNRWA because many people were not allowed to get into schools, very poor services, though during our prior discussions with UNRWA, they said they have preparedness plans, emergency and so on, but this proved to be very poor. So people for the first few days were in a very critical conditions in these temporary shelters. Some thousand managed to escape and to flee the conflict areas to their relatives in Gaza. As of now, when we are talking about almost 8,000 housing units been damaged, the overwhelming majority were partially damaged. So people managed to repair and to return back to their homes. But out of the total number, we are talking about almost 1,300 housing units. There people are still still displaced, without shelter. They have to flee the UNRWA schools because of for the education sector. Many were in rented houses. Many others still with relatives, living with relatives in a very, very crowded way. I mean, we are talking about sometimes the family with the brothers, sisters, and their families and so on. So in a very poor situation until now. Reconstruction has not started yet in Gaza. So that, I mean, I don't see very soon an easing of the suffering of those people. Add to them other thousands from previous wars that are still waiting on the list for reconstruction.
Thank you. Those of us who come from BC are particularly sensitive to this because we've had so many thousands of people displaced by floods. But of course, our government rushes in to help us. So it's a different situation altogether. People were wanting to know more about the role of UNRWA. What could you say about that? So you've told us they have schools. What else do they do?
Well, UNRWA provides services for refugees in Gaza. And Palestinian refugees in 5 areas, not only in Gaza, also in the West Bank, in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. The agency provides crucial services to the Palestinian refugees community. When it comes to Gaza, we are talking about almost 70% of the total population are refugee population. So they provide the basic services, including education, up to the elementary school, not to not all phases. The primary school, plus elementary, but the last 3 years of school are run by the government, not by UNRWA. So they don't have further education, just like 9 years of education. In Palestine, the basic schooling is 12 years. So they provide education for 70% of the Gaza population, almost 70%, for 9 years, not for 12 years. They have one vocational center in Gaza, one vocational training. So in education, they provide good services in this respect. They provide healthcare, especially the primary care. Very important. They have clinics in every refugee community, so they provide healthcare to the people. They provide social welfare support to the poorest of the poor in the refugee camps. I think those are the most important things that are provided by UNRWA. Again, their role is very vital. Their presence symbolizes the presence of the refugee problem. As long as the refugee issue is not settled, their role is very important and must be supported.
They have a lot of work to do, that's for sure. What can you say about Christians in Gaza?
Gaza used to have wonderful Christian community. In the last 15 years or so, and due to the closure, to the conflict in Gaza, as many other communities, let's say whether it's Christian or Muslims, we have witnessed a hysteria in terms of fleeing Gaza and leaving the country. So especially in the new generations, I mean, who is able, any person who is able just to flee Gaza and leave for better life conditions can leave. The community is very few, but I think they are managing to cope with the situation with in the severest conditions in Gaza. What applies to Christians applies to non-Christian or to Muslims or
Okay. So somebody asked how much support the US gives to UNRWA. Do you have any sense of that?
Well, I don't have figures, but let me say during the Trump administration, the US cut off all support to UNRWA. Most recently, after the Biden administration, even prior to his election, he was committed during his campaign to resume support for UNRWA. They have gone through some understandings, and I think most recently in the last few months, 3 months, they have signed a contract, but I'm not sure about the allocations on that.
Okay. So someone asked if people are not refugees, are they getting services too? And so I thought maybe you could tell us what proportion of people in Gaza are refugees as well.
Well, there is a government in Gaza, supposedly the Palestinian government. After Oslo, there has been a kind of autonomy in the some parts of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. The government, the Palestinian government, is responsible for, I mean, the provision of services for refugees and non-refugees. However, since the split, since the Palestinian internal conflict, and the takeover of Hamas by the takeover of Gaza by Hamas, the services are to the minimal. Still, the Palestinian government in Ramallah provides support, some very minor support in education and health, and they pay for some services. Other services are supported by the government in Gaza, but to frankly speaking, very much below expectations, especially in supporting the very vulnerable and weak communities in the Gaza Strip.
Let me see here. Are Médecins Sans Frontières personnel allowed into Gaza? How does that work?
I think, yes, they work. Médecins Sans Frontières and many other humanitarian organizations work in Gaza, yes.
But Israel has to give them permission to come.
Yeah, of course, of course, of course.
Do the efforts of your organization have any effect on Israel, on Palestine, or on Hamas? Do you feel you're making some impact on any of these groups?
This is very tough.
Yes.
Because if we have really influenced these stakeholders or duty bearers, I would not be talking about the deterioration of the situation. The problem is about the political will. Let's say, for example, together with our partners, we have been advocating for let's say, the EU, the European Union, to take small actions just against the ongoing and continuous violations of Palestinian rights. No single action. It's not a matter of it's not a matter of knowledge. They know more than we know, especially in the West Bank, in Area C, and so on, and Jerusalem. It's a matter of will. When we and we have a lot of advocacy work together with our partners in Brussels. When we speak to Brussels, they would say, we are 27 countries with different policies, and it's a compromise. We cannot take really actions. You have people against you, people with, so you need to lobby capitals, to lobby member states. So we go to member states. So they say, it's Brussels. This is Brussels must act. So we are being shuttled in between. But my point is there is no will to take actions. For example, most recently, Israel outlawed 6 leading human rights and civil society organizations in the West Bank. We have serious work with these organizations, engaged. Some of them have a lot of work with the United Nations, with the EU, with the different capitals in the world. They are well known to have clear-cut and very transparent human rights work. Some others provide healthcare services, agricultural services to communities in the West Bank. The 6 organizations have been outlawed by Israel for their role to help and support Palestinians for their work against Israeli violations. For example, the 6 organizations included 2 human rights organizations, one defending prisoners in Israel, the other working on accountability, and they are partners with us, and we are together in The Hague. So they outlawed this organization to prevent their work, because we work on accountability. What did the work do? Until now, nothing. And the organization in the coming 2 months are subjected to more actions, because they were given like 2 months period to appeal. Where to appeal? To the Israeli judiciary, who is part of this attack on Palestinians, when it comes to the judiciary, it's a cover-up on the army's violation. It's not for just for Palestinians. When you come, if you are talking about the Palestinian Authority and to Hamas, sometimes when I have just before this meeting, I was in a meeting with our partners, Christian Aid, a meeting for outcome harvesting. And it was been like 4 hours meeting, one of a series of meetings, just to identify where we have been able to influence things. Sometimes it's beyond your control, because it's not a matter of civil society. I would say, sometimes I ask myself this question, how the situation would look like without our engagement, without our role. You can't imagine. It would be much worse, much worse. We provide services on the individual level. Yes, we achieve. We can support women in courts. We can support providing legal aid to victims. Sometimes we achieve, sometimes not. But the whole system is collapsing. For the Palestinian, because of the split, the ongoing split, a year ago almost, we were very much optimistic, and Omar follows closely, I think, about election scheduled last May. Then Israel did not allow Palestinians in Jerusalem to participate in election. So it was cancelled. It was postponed. We have no legislative council as of now. In the West Bank, the president resumed the function of the legislature. So he issued presidential decrees, laws of presidential decrees. And in Gaza, Hamas bloc in the former legislative council claimed to be the legislators. So they also legislate for Gaza. This is all illegal. That's why we need election to change. Without having a real political system with real separation of power, with real legislature and independent judiciary, nothing will change. We are fighting for this.
It is a very complex situation, and how to find your way into making a change is, I'm sure, a big challenge.
This is the significance here in Gaza in particular. In all other contexts, I would say, a human rights organization is challenging one authority. Here we are challenging 3.
Right.
And each of them have a say and control in some dimensions here and there.
Right. Okay. And I just one last question. If Hamas weren't there, would Israel give Gaza people their freedom?
No.
No.
Why not? Why?
Hmm.
You know, Mariana, I know no person who has been committed to the peace process more than Mahmoud Abbas, the president. He has been the architect of the whole peace process. He supported it from his heart. What did Israel give Mahmoud Abbas? They almost circled, and they did not give him even a single hint of hope for the people in the peace process. That's why he was voted out in 2006 election. Had the Israeli side had any interest in peace, they would have supported the agent of peace. They did not. And people see on on their skin how it's not a matter of Hamas. Hamas settlement, even the attacks, prior to Hamas. So Hamas is a pretext. It's not a matter of Hamas. If it's a matter of Hamas, so what's about the rest of the West Bank? Are people free in the West Bank? The situation is not in the level of occupation. We suffer from collective punishment, mainly from the closure. But this is man-made crisis, catastrophe. And to me, as I see it, it's not an existential threat to the Palestinians. Once the closure is lifted, there is a great potential for development. So, and the humanitarian crisis would end. But what's about the cancer in the West Bank, the expansion of settlement, the cantonization of the West Bank, the fragmentation of the territory? This is the real threat. And there is no Hamas there.
Thank you. You're a very eloquent speaker, and I have learned an awful lot from listening to you today. And I think on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you for your dedicating your time and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your support and for this wonderful event. And peace on you all.
A link to a video of this gathering, along with all the links shared today, will be available on the Kumi Now website and on YouTube in a day or two. And it will be shared in the next newsletter. You can subscribe to Kumi Now on YouTube and subscribe to our newsletter to make sure you receive them. We would greatly appreciate it if you would share this amazing, important session with your friends and colleagues, as well as information on our future sessions. Next week, we will focus on the right of return. And if you'd like to be reminded of the online gatherings an hour before they begin, you can register for email reminders at kuminow.com online using the form at the bottom of the page. I just want to say one more thing. I noticed somebody talking about a song by Garth Hewitt, something about Christmas is being destroyed or something. It'd be interesting to look that up. So we hope to see you back here in a week's time. Thanks again and good night.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.